Simply put, why Hey Jude? Sure, you talk about its reflective, comforting qualities, both internally and externally, on you and the world. But why delve into that one track rather than, say, the band as a whole, or the artist, the era, and everything else that comes out of the generation-defying events around the Beatles?
Well, that's a great first question, only because that is a big decision you have to make before you embark on something like this. I always just wanted to write, not always, it's not like a dream of mine forever, but I always did. The last couple of years I started to concentrate more on single songs. Doing my Warren Zevon book, I did essays about songs that kind of described the artist. And that I was inspired by Greil Marcus's brilliant Like a Rolling Stone, Bob Dylan at the Crossroads, and Dave Marsh's book on Louie Louie, my friend Alan Light's book on Hallelujah. Many, many great books have been written about, not that many, but 8 or 9 have been written about one song. So I was intrigued by that concept. So the most important thing I would like to get across in this interview and other interviews that I do about the book is that I wanted to celebrate the concept of song, how it affects us, any song. And I've said this before, I would really love for people to interject their memories of a song that did for them what Hey Jude did for me as a kid. Or not even that, maybe as a teenager, maybe as a first love, maybe something that reminded them of something they did as a kid, or a trip they took. So Hey Jude for me was sort of the starting point, but it was very important for me to not concentrate totally on the fact that it's the Beatles, that it's Paul McCartney, that it hits the era. Of course, all those things are in the book because you can't separate them, but it was very important for me to just write a book about a song. And that's why I brought in professors from different disciplines to talk about it, from a sociological standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, a psychological standpoint. Certainly musicologists helped. And interviewed Beatle biographers and Paul McCartney biographers and songwriters from different disciplines and also different eras was a big help in me coming to the conclusion of why a song like Hey Jude works, or why any of our favorite songs work, whether they're huge hits like Hey Jude, or there's something maybe you heard, again, as a teenager, or maybe on a trip, or something that someone turned you on to with a mixtape. Well, I'm dating myself, or a mixed whatever, and how those songs move us.
You know, you focus a lot on the lyrical content of the song, and even stylistically in the book, you have these interjections of certain lines and italics to fill it out. Was that your choice right off the bat, that you really wanted to focus on how the lyrics play into also what you're discussing? Because I feel like it's very strategic in what lyrics you put where in the book, even the titles of the chapters.
Yeah, that's another good question, and thanks for noticing that, because what I decided to do against the initial wishes of the publisher and my copy editors, because it's a verboten, as you know, as a fellow writer, to quote lyrics with italics. But I felt like because we're doing one song, every time I go to that song, I bring up the italics for it. It comes out that way, and I think it was Howard Soon's, Paul McCartney's biographer, who said, when Paul goes for music as a metaphor or a symbol, when he says take a sad song, which is the title of my book, and make it better, it's serious for Paul, because Paul was about music. Music, as I cover in the book, inspired him to get over the death of his mother at 14. It introduced him to John Lennon, which changed his life. Everything was music for Paul. And so I wanted those lyrics to jump off the page, because I am just covering one song. So that was very important to me as well. And using lyrics from the song to title each chapter, like my favorite one, if I may, was "Let It Out and Let It In," which is the title of my very brief history of the Beatles. Because in a way, I think George Harrison said, we gave everybody a reason to go nuts, and they went nuts. And that's something that the Beatles brought in. They got as much from Beatlemania and their fans as they put out. So the Beatles started this thing. Look at the Beatles as like a spark. But really the fandom the zeitgeist, the period, the 1960s itself fed to the Beatles. So that is very much a let it out and let it in. And I do think that Hey Jude is the culmination of all the Beatles' work. That was the other thing I came to understand, and it's an argument that I make in the book, that it has all the elements of what makes the Beatles great and what inspired them as kids, what moved them along. The history of music, whether it be country, rockabilly, soul, gospel, Americana. The Beatles, as you know, came to America and retaught us what was great about our music, and covered a lot of songs by artists that people had forgotten by 1963, like Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, and Little Richard, and they did a great service to American music, and I think all of that is in Hey Jude. It's Paul's way of tapping back into the thing that makes him Paul McCartney, which is one of the greatest, if not arguably, and I make an argument in the book, the greatest pop music composer of the 20th century.
And I agree with that 100%. I think that this song, lyrically, because it has two separate aspects of it, you have Nas, na na na,
right?
Which, are they lyrics? Yes. I think this is a
Sure.
song that solidifies that these can be verses and these can be different stanzas, and they can have different meanings, just two letters. So I love that there was an emphasis on that, and even early on in the book you said there's 216 Nas in the song. That's no small feat, and for it to be a song that's so powerful,
Sure.
and that's a majority of the lyrics, I like that you tapped into that, and also with the italics of the Nas every time they're referenced. It really, I think, hones in on their impact, so I loved that.
Thank you. Yeah, the Nas, obviously, the na-na-nas, the end is longer than the actual ballad. It's the unity aspect of the comfort and unity that I bring up later in the book. When we break the book down, when I go into the, when we break the song down, when I go into it with all the different experts, how does the song work? Why do the lyrics get through? There's that great story that when Paul makes the joke about, I think Stephen Colbert asked him, why do people connect to you universally, young, old, from different countries? And he made the joke, simple lyrics, because na-na-na is not even English or any language, which connects it across, many languages as well. But there's nothing simple about, in fact, I looked it up and I was going to put it in the book, but I didn't end up doing it. But you just reminded me. I think I found 109 songs that have the na-nas in them. And only 3 or 4 of them, I think, happen before Hey Jude. So when you hear a na-na in a song, it's, you can't help but go back and think of Hey Jude and Paul's use of that, brilliant use of it.
In the chapter titled Let It Out and Let It In, you note that these early 60s Beatle days, taking America was a, quote, transformative generational moment, and, quote, America was ready for the Beatles. Had they emerged later or somehow earlier, how do you think their legacy would have shifted or been compromised?
You mean if the Beatles had not been as famous or had not ingrained themselves in American culture? That's another great question, and I'll tell you why. Because I did come to that conclusion later on. I forget who said it, and again, I apologize, but please read the book. One of the experts said that 2 things. The first thing is that in 1963, when the Beatles came here, and the way the history, and I tend to agree with it, evokes this, is that they woke America up from its malaise, or certainly its depression and, its mourning of the death of John F. Kennedy. Kennedy's killed in November of 63. The Beatles come here in February of 64. They did a similar thing in 63. There was a controversy in British politics, and they ended up, becoming the big story and kind of wiping that off the headlines. So in 1968, and I covered 1968, a whole chapter, as you know, in the book. And when I was writing this book in 2020, everybody kept saying, wow, this is the worst year since 1968, not only with the pandemic and the economic woes, but, the political unrest, we were facing our racial, everything was happening. And it wasn't just happening culturally. It was happening in the streets. It was happening to our neighbors. There was so many things going on in 2020. In 68, it was tenfold. You have Vietnam. You have the assassinations of Robert Kennedy. You have the assassination of Martin Luther King. You have the protests in France. You have the protests in Britain. You have the things going on in Europe with Russia. You have especially things going on in Ireland with the English and the Irish. In America, you have unrest in the college campuses, Columbia University. There is so many things going on. Hey Jude becomes the #1 song of the year. It's #1 for 9 weeks in America, which is longer than any other Beatles song. I was surprised to learn. 19 weeks overall. It's #1 all over the globe in a wider swath than any other Beatles song. So in that case, it was important that the Beatles did it. They needed to be ingrained in the pop culture. And I think Hey Jude benefits from that. But it also is Paul, again, going back and seeing what the Beatles have done. He talks about how when they wrote songs like From Me to You or I Want to Hold Your Hand, they were speaking directly to their audience. Hey Jude speaks to your audience. After a while, he's not talking to Jude anymore. He's talking to his generation. He's talking to Beatle fans and non-Beatle fans alike. Kids coming home from Vietnam. Not that a song, I'm not trying to say that a song can change the world or solve the violence or make racial situations go away or political strife smoothed out in any way. But it does tell us that a song can tap in to our anxieties. And there's a reason why we want it. And it is a communal thing. I think it was, I do remember McKinney, the writer, who told me, and I believe I put it in the book, that Hey Jude was 9 weeks of brightness in an otherwise dark year, something to that effect. And I think he's right. And the second thing I was going to say is Paul understood, too, what it was like to overcome tragedy with music. Because when he lost his mom at 14, and I dedicate the chapter that I talk about, man is music, music is man, or song is man, as Paul understanding the importance of what music can do, what it did for his dad, who lost his wife, and rekindled by finding the piano, and then seeing what it did for his family being around the piano and playing. And then, of course, what it did for John and John, because John lost his mom too, and that was their connection. So the empathy that Paul brings to this song is universal and personal, and it's so beautifully done. And I think that's why it works, because the Beatles had already tapped into that, and Paul knew it as an artist, I think.
The subtle Lennon-McCartney harmonies are practically cinematic parallels. One man is singing it to another while another is singing it to himself. And Hutchinson called it a duality. How would the song differ, if at all, had it been more of a solo McCartney-inclined vocal tune?
Well, I think Rob Sheffield from Rolling Stone said it over and over again. He said, this is a Ringo song. So this is a band song. It swings because Ringo is there. Yes, it's Paul's ballad. It's his statement. He is talking to someone else. And I think it was Eric, you mentioned the songwriter, my friend Eric Hutchinson. He was the guy who brought up, and I brought it up with other songwriters, that it's a song in the second person. And that could seem very preachy. That could seem very high and mighty. I've got all the answers. I'm Paul McCartney. I'm of the Beatles. I'm the guy who told you about the Maharishi and LSD, and I soothed your pain after the Kennedy assassination. But that's not how this song comes across. It's it's a pep talk, but it's also very empathetic. It's understanding. And the one thing I will note, you talk about that beautiful harmony that John and Paul do together, and I think it was Tim Riley, the musicologist, who was a great help for me in this book, who said it might be the first time, and I looked it up and it is, the only time that John goes above Paul in the singing. And it's just so beautiful how they support each other. What Paul does with him on Don't Let Me Down. Another song, by the way, that it's asking someone else to support my feelings towards you. As I said in the book, and I don't want to get too deep in like cheap psychology here, but I think I delve deeper into the idea that a lot of the Beatles songs that John and Paul wrote together, specifically in the early days, but a lot of the Beatles songs are sort of a subconscious way of them communicating that loss that they had of their mother, that connection, that female love and comfort, that especially for Paul, whose mom was a nurse, but also for John, because his mom Julia was so sweet and fun. She was more like a sister, you know. She supported his music. She never reprimanded him. She saw that he was a great artist and supported both Paul and John, and they loved her so. And that she was struck down at a young age. And I think a lot of those songs, like She Loves You, which I see a lineage between She Loves You and Hey Jude, in which you have one man talking to another man, hey, this girl loves you, you should be glad about that. Really go after it. And Paul is saying, you have found her, now go and get her. And you mention it. John immediately hears this and goes, that's a song about me. I just found Yoko. Yoko completes that pain, that hole that I've had since my mom died. Paul meets Linda maybe a couple of months before that. They both meet the women that will complete them, that they will stay with until Linda's death at 58 in 1998 and John's death in 1980, of course. So John and Paul are on this mission and writing these songs, beseeching these special women that they're imagining in their art. And they're finding them at the same time. And here's Paul writing it. And you know the story, he goes out to comfort Julian and John's ex-wife Cynthia, which is such a sweet thing to do. And he writes, Hey Jules. But in essence, it really is a song about him and John. And it's a song about the Beatles who are going through they've plateaued. They're going through some fissures. And he's saying we need to stop being cool and let ourselves be vulnerable and let ourselves understand how lucky we are to have found it ourselves. And how you need someone to go perform with. When he sings that, people are like, well, that's a weird way to say, do you mean perform sexually? Do you mean perform like let's hold hands and show, public affection? No, I think what he's actually saying there is you need somebody, harmony vocals, you need a band to back you up for your song and to make it better. So it's all in there. It really, really is.
I like how you brought up their love lives, Linda and Yoko kind of having this, as you mentioned, an eerily similar kind of backstory coming into their relationships with John and Paul, and having Paul's positively evolving love life kind of coinciding with John's increasingly broken, before meeting Yoko, love life and personal life.
Sure.
And we do know that the song is written for Julian at its core, no matter how we look at it today. Do you think that the song would penetrate as deeply had we and the world not known its backstory and just why one of the Beatles was writing a comforting tune for another Beatles son?
Well, I never think that it's fun to write books about this. I think that I think any songwriter will tell you this. Any song that's written, the second it gets out there, it becomes somebody else's song, which is why people get really, really crazy when songs are used to sell sneakers or gasoline or, whatever. But that's the right of the songwriter. I'm not getting involved in that. But I will say that a song is owned by whomever listens to it. And their interpretation is completely valid, completely valid. And as I said earlier, the experience that people have with songs, not just this song, is completely valid. So I don't think you need to know the whole backstory to it. And I will also say, I personally think, and I never talked to Paul for this book, I've talked to everybody around him certainly, and I think it actually informed me better to be able to interpret rather than say, Paul, what do you think? Because the 80-year-old Paul is not going to be able to go, oh yeah, like when I wrote this when I was 26, or I thought about this when I was 18 or whatever. When you're writing a song, and a lot of songwriters chimed in on this in the book, but I just like you, I've interviewed dozens of songwriters over the years. They start off with that germ of an idea. Hey, Jules, I know you're going through a divorce. Your parents are going through a divorce. I know you feel like your world is breaking apart, but you're going to get through this. But then it does go into the woman. You have found her, now go and get her. Hey, Jude, don't let me down. Be vulnerable. I think my friend Adam Duritz said this really well. Adam's written some beautiful, beautiful songs about love and about loss. And he said, look, it's a song about vulnerability. If you're not willing to get hurt, then you're not willing to be in love. And there were barriers that John and Paul, especially John, put up. That's why John thought the song was about him. John put up big barriers. Paul had a loving father. John did not. John was fished off to, even with his mother, he was farmed off to, his aunt, Mimi. And he didn't have a sibling right there with him. Paul had his brother. Paul had his dad. He had a loving family around him. There was a different dynamic there. So where John shut down and became like this fist, Paul became this overly empathetic, to the point where a lot of people make fun of Paul for being like too, silly. But I think there's something, he said, I think Paul, I quote Paul in the book as saying, I'm sentimental, but that's fine with me. If you want to make fun of me for being sentimental, it allows me to open up and write more. So I think all of that is in the song. So even though it starts off with this great paean, for lack of a better term, or this sympathy for Julian, I think it allows Paul to dig deep. Because ultimately, I think I found in this book, researching it, that this song's about Paul and the power of song to heal him and get him through his mother's death and get him through those tough times in Hamburg with the Beatles where they were playing, 15 hours a day and getting no food. They're children. They're 17, 18 years old, and they're playing, in front of prostitutes and drunken sailors, and God knows what was going on there. They were awakened way too early. But song got Paul through that, and that's in Hey Jude, for me. Yeah.
Were you surprised by any perspectives that you found out about regarding Hey Jude during your research, reading, and speaking with an array of people?
I was. I think again, Devin McKinney, who wrote a beautiful book called The Magic Circle, which Tim Riley turned me on to two books, Dreaming the Beatles by Rob Sheffield, which I think is the best Beatle book ever, and so many. But Devin's was very interesting. There was a darkness in that book. He talks a lot about that. But he brought up, in the book, he writes one line, "Hey Jude makes me shudder when I think of it, when I listen to it now." Then I asked him, well, you got to tell me that. And he told me what happens is when you're younger, you're like, there's better songs. A Day in the Life, Strawberry Fields Forever, I Want to Hold Your Hand. Like, these are just better songs. But then after you get older and you have more experiences, you start to feel the empathy that Paul had. And I think it was Kylie Lotz of Pedal, she goes by Pedal, wonderful singer-songwriter from the Philadelphia area. She gave me a great female perspective of this. But she said, you need to have lived to write Hey Jude. She goes, I don't think in my 20s I could have conceived that. It's amazing at 26. Remember, Paul wrote When I'm 64 when he was 14 or 15. It's crazy, right? He could always envision what it would be like. I'm always amazed, getting back to any song, right? I'm always amazed that Joni Mitchell, at 21 years old, wrote Both Sides Now. How the hell does that happen? We're writers. You're supposed to put yourself in the mindset, but I don't know how the hell that happens, that you haven't had your heart crushed yet. You haven't looked back on a whole life of mistakes and triumphs and fears and anxieties and joys, and to write a song like Both Sides Now, which I think is right up there with Hey Jude as one of the most beautiful songs ever written in pop music. But yeah, I mean, to me, Paul's ability to communicate in song really doesn't have a peer. It really doesn't, for me. And I didn't always feel that way until I started, writing the book. But getting back to your question about, surprises, McKinney surprised me because he didn't even put it in his own book, but he expressed it to me, and about how many people talked about the payoff. And I'm like, yeah, it's true. Everybody, whether it was a musicologist or somebody who studies or writes about music, or songwriters, would always say, the second this song starts, we all kind of know where it's going to go. We know where it's going to end up. We imagine it. Psychologically, we're there. And the song brings us there. There's a payoff, which is one of the reasons why I called it the emotional currency of Hey Jude, besides the fact that it does pay forward a real empathy and comfort to people of all races, creeds, ages, generations. But there is something about the way he puts the little na-nas at the end of each bridge. We're going there, here we go. And then when that all comes in with that high note that he hits, it's just, so that was something I was very surprised, was the whole idea of the payoff. And I thought that's very, very true. And of course, Eric Hutchinson made one great observation, which I went back and I saw the Beatles did this a lot, whether it was Help or Nowhere Man or, She Loves You. Hey Jude is the name of the song, the melody, and everything in the first two lines. If you ask somebody right now, how does Hey Jude go? They go, Hey Jude, right? They don't go the na-na part. They don't do the, and let it out or let it in. They do that. The song is right there in the first seconds, jumping out of the radio. That's genius. And so those are the things I learned. There's many others, but that's the fun part of writing a book like this. You go in with some ideas and then the experts take you in another completely different place. Yeah.
An imperative lyric in Hey Jude that is greatly discussed in the book is, quote, "The movement you need is on your shoulder. Now, having heard, discussed, and explored various perspectives on this line, what do you think it means?
Well, that's the beauty of this book. This is the first book I've ever written and researched where I tried to take a bit of a background and let everybody speak, which is why I'm doing these book appearances, and I'm trying to get the people, and some of them have agreed, we're trying to squeeze that all in the schedule, of having a lot of the voices from this book represented when I talk to people. Because I found I've done a couple of these podcasts and now I'm talking to you, and I'm trying to remember who said what, because they gave me so much stuff that you're going to get in the book that I can't give. I talk about it twice in the book, or maybe 3 times. Paul originally writes, the movement you need is on your shoulder as a placeholder. When he wrote Yesterday, he kept singing scrambled eggs, scrambled eggs. And so he would do that because he was a melody machine. John was a word guy more, I think. But Paul was a melody machine. Let me just get it out, put anything in there, and then I'll tell a story. So even when he played it for John, he says, well, that's placeholder. It's gibberish. And John, being John, said, no, that's the best line in it. He always adored that line. And John, even when he was bashing Paul with granny music and silly love songs in the 70s, he always said, Paul was very underrated as a lyricist. He goes, go listen to Hey Jude. So that's the first thing. Second thing we talked about was movement in a sense. I mentioned earlier 1968. That was the great movement. That's the end of the leftist music. That's the culmination of the leftist movement from the late 50s into the early 60s. The civil rights movement, the free speech movement out in Berkeley, the women's movement. These things are clashing. They're clashing. So now you have the movement battling each other. Who represents, the Black Panthers, you got the Martin Luther King side for the race, equality. Women are disagreeing. The intellectuals on the left and the right. You have the beginning of the conservative movement, a backlash. You have the religious right movement. You have a lot of these movements. So is Paul, in a sense, tapping in a little bit to that? I don't see how he could have ignored it. He's in America in June at the Capitol Records conference when he consummates his relationship with Linda. So they have been kind of flirting, saw each other in England, but they get together and they're a couple now. And he comes back to England in love with Linda. That trip, he just misses Robert Kennedy's assassination in early June that year. So he has to be aware of these things going on. But I think ultimately, though, and again, I want people to read the book because there's many I'm leaving out. Ultimately, though, the movement you need is on your shoulder means nothing and everything. And that's what great poetry will give you. You can, again, put your own experiences in it, and then you'll get the answers that you have. But I personally felt like it was a way for Paul, because Paul says throughout the song, hey, Jude, you'll do. You got this. You don't need fancy religion. You don't need the Beatles. You don't need, politicians are not going to save you. Movements are not going to save you. The color of your skin, your gender. You got to find it here. What's that great Gandhi quote? I think I quoted it, but you have to change yourself first. Change comes from within, something to that effect. It might have been Tolstoy, I forget. But somebody very smart said that. And I'm not saying that this is not as Stephen Kellogg told me, and I think I put it in the book, it's not a bootstrap song. Like, get your shit together. You'll be fine. You don't need... Sometimes people do need things like religion or medicine or friends. I'm not saying you don't, and neither is Paul. But there's something different about, hey, Jude, you could do this. You can make it better. John is, all you need is love. Imagine there's no heaven. Like, John's very grandiose. Paul, I thought, always got right to the bone of the matter. I think that also comes from his mom, because she was a nurse and she believed in supporting people, but he'd see her with people. You need to get up and walk again if you injure yourself. You need to try to sit up and start to rebuild. So I think the movement you need is on your shoulders says a lot of that.
I know Professor Joel Stillerman thinks the line was a call to action, but I never thought of it as such. I always thought of the movement you need is on your shoulder was kind of like the angel and devil on your shoulder, the path you should be taking, that Sure. It's on your shoulder. Whatever one you go with, it's up to you. So I thought that was Very interesting of a perspective. It wasn't really call to action. It was more an inward look at yourself.
That's what I love about, thank you for saying that, because that's what I love about the book too, if I may say. These people bring up arguments that you're like, no. But then that makes you think about your argument, your interpretation. That got you to thinking, wait a minute, that doesn't ring true to me. I forget who said it, but again, I apologize. A lot of people didn't see this song. A lot of people told me they can't wait for the nanas. They can't wait to sing with their friends. They like to be in a big group. Like when I went to see Mccartney in '89, that was the thing I write about at the beginning of the book. I looked around this giant arena, Madison Square Garden. Everybody's singing this song, and nobody is too cool to do it. We're all into it, right? And Paul's touring now, so God bless him. But yeah, I think that it's great that whatever it is you get out of it, if it's a song that you can't wait for everyone to sing, or it's a personal song that means a lot to you, alone listening to it in your car or wherever you are.
I love that you also just brought up how John kind of had a broader interpretation of life and how he's going to impart that through music.
Right.
You compare Hey Jude to All You Need Is Love. Why do you think that Hey Jude strikes a more resounding emotional chord than All You Need Is Love, or at that, a song like Let It Be?
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Again, I want to go back to this. I know a lot of people don't like Hey Jude. There's a lot of people who love it. There's a lot of people who don't like the Beatles that much. That it's a smaller group than, say, when you're arguing the Ramones or, Sinead O'Connor or whatever you want to pick. There's all different styles or whatever music you like. But you can't argue with something working. Like, why does it work? And it doesn't even necessarily have to be popular. And that's the question I ask over and over again in the book. Why does this song work? Why do songs affect us? And to hear psychologists say, it goes all the way back to the womb in many ways. It goes back to the dawn of man. It goes back to us hearing music live and responding to it. And then Edison creates a way for us to listen to it over and over again. That affects how we absorb the music. Sociology, Professor Stilleman, he's saying what's going on around us is Dr. Koch, who's a musicologist from NC State, he said, I teach my students all the time, not about Beethoven as if he's this two-dimensional character that's, painted on the wall. He lived in Vienna during a very volatile time. There's no way, and we know it, we know that he was inspired or repulsed by Napoleon or whatever was going on. So nothing happens in a vacuum. But I wouldn't even compare it necessarily with that. I tried not to continue to argue. I love Hey Jude. I do. I spent a year of my life on it. But I don't think it's my favorite Beatles song. But I'm not trying to convince you that it's the greatest Beatles song. What I'm trying to get at in this book is how specifically Paul and John were so good at that, tapping in to the things that make us feel better about ourselves or about our surroundings and that kind of thing. So I joked when the Zevon book came out, everyone said, why Warren Zevon? And I said, because there's enough damn Beatle books. And then I went and wrote one. So I'm guilty as charged. But you can't deny the universal appeal of that. Yeah.
I agree. I love Hey Jude. I definitely look at it differently now, more than ever before.
Oh, thank you.
So I think I love it more because you are able to expand my perspective of it. So thank you for that. I did want to note about the visual component, the film clip that came with Hey Jude, and how it's Paul at the piano, looks into the camera. He kind of feels like he's speaking to you, which we were mentioning, Hey Jude could be towards himself, it could be to John, it could be to Julian. Mm-hmm. Coming off of Magical Mystery Tour, what do you think that this video and this film clip meant to the song and its visual component and also in its message? This pre-MTV, pre-Get Back documentary, mm-hmm. How do you think that elevated or didn't the song as a whole? Because I think that was interesting.
Oh, it absolutely did. Getting Michael Lindsay Hogg for the book was a real coup. Michael, of course, directed Let It Be, the Get Back sessions, which Peter Jackson did a brilliant job of those 6 hours presenting that narrative of the Beatles. He directed the Hey Jude video, but he had directed the earlier. So we all know that the Beatles got off the road. They didn't want to tour anymore, so they wanted to film themselves to get it out to the fans. And so they had originally hired Michael Lindsay Hogg, who had done some fiction work, some comedy work. He worked with David Frost. And he did the Paperback Writer, Rain videos. He did the Jumpin' Jack Flash video for the Stones, which is a big deal for the Stones because Brian Jones couldn't tour because of his drug issues. And it was Paul who saw the Jumpin' Jack Flash and wanted to get Michael for this. And I love the fact that when Michael sat down with Paul and he tells me this for the book, he says, we can't have you singing Na Na Na's for 4 minutes. I know you're the Beatles and I love you, but we can't do it. And Paul's like, well, what's your idea? He goes, well, I want to get the world to sing it. And Paul didn't get it at first, but after a while, Paul was like, oh, you mean like the Postman? So they got people of all different ages, all different races, all different, backgrounds, and they brought them into a room. And I didn't know this, but they brought in several of these backgrounds. So they did like 3 or 4 different takes, and they'd bring in a new studio audience. And the cool thing was, in between, the Beatles would play. And they got to remember how much fun it was, just the 4 of them, not with orchestras and backwards tracks and all they've been doing the last couple of years, but back to the way it was in Hamburg or at the Cavern in Liverpool. And that inspired for the Beatles doing the Get Back sessions, and it also inspired them allowing cameras to be in, because a BBC. Which I describe in the book, a BBC special came in and shot the Beatles rehearsing the song. And when Paul saw the footage, he's like, this is so cool. We're not acting. We're not trying to be anything. We're doing what we do well, make music. So I think that video clip, to answer the question, is quintessential to the lasting legacy and legend of this song. And the fact that it played in 5 or 6 different countries around the same time when the song was dominating the airwaves. And when they get to the Na-Nas and all these people come rushing in and sing with the Beatles, and they look like they're having the times of their lives. This is a period where they weren't talking much. Ringo had quit the band. George would quit soon and come back. There was a lot of infighting with the White Album. Yoko was in the scene, and John was sort of saying, this is me and Yoko now, and the Beatles. Paul had fallen in love. So there was a lot of, George was still feeling the pains of everybody leaving the Maharishi because he still was into the Maharishi, and they kind of accused him of some things. So the Beatles were very individualistic, but when they got together to do this and people saw them doing it, it made all the difference in the world. And Tim Riley said, if you look at the Beatles on the roof, it's the Hey Jude video. The second they get together and start playing, all the bullshit goes away, and they realize how freaking good they are and the groove that they make that nobody else can make together. And that's what the Hey Jude video does. Even though they're lip syncing, they're playing, and they're doing it together, and the group, and the fact that for 7 minutes and 11 seconds, everybody got to forget about Vietnam, about assassinations, about riots in the streets, about race relations, about women movement, all that stuff. Just for a few seconds. Isn't that what great art? I mean, great art can compel us, challenge us, be part of our revolution, which I write about in the book as well. I talk about songs from that era. But songs could also be a respite. And Rob Sheffield said, I feel like the B-side, Revolution, which is the sort of the yang to the yin here, John's Revolution is tapping into sort of what was going on there, the Chairman Mao stuff. And he felt that Paul wasn't an escapist. Paul was like saying, by Paul talking to you and saying you can change, the world that you're in, it's much more powerful statement. And that was one thing I learned. I agree with that now. I didn't think that. I used to think Paul's being a little cute here. Some people told me that too. Like, we didn't like the song then. The Beatles were, everybody, the Stones and Marvin Gaye, and everybody was James Brown, and they were speaking to the streets, and the Beatles were too lofty. I disagree. I think the Beatles were right there. They had a responsibility to their art first. They always did. They didn't do yeah for 6 years. They changed radically every period that they worked. So anytime you look at the Beatles, you look at them as artists first. And then they are other things. They comment on fashion and comportment and religion and, the 60s thing. But they're music first, And I think that comes across in this single specifically. And it shows us both John and Paul's personalities clashing up, which makes them great, period.
I think the video for Hey Jude, it shows a united front, a compassionate group of musicians.
Right.
And especially coming off of Magical Mystery Tour and things that are a little bit more gimmicky visually.
Good point.
This is much more subdued, back to their roots. So I have a very much newfound respect for the visual aspect of this song.
And they were a visual band.
They were.
They had the 4 haircuts and the 4 suits and the Beatle books at first, Beatle boots, I should say, at first, and they made their bones in England on the Grand Performance, and then later on at Ed Sullivan. They were a visual band. When Sgt. Pepper's came out, that cover blew everyone's head apart, and it was a visual thing. So for them to do that for Hey Jude made perfect sense. And Michael Lindsay Hogg is especially now seeing that the Get Back footage. Everybody said that Michael Lindsay Hogg drove them crazy because he was constantly like, guys, what are we doing? But I felt his pain because I do videography work, and we it's hard. It's hard to get people to stay focused. The Beatles were all over the place. Well, they told him, we're going to do a TV show and we're going to play at the end. Well, where's the songs? Where's the gig? Where are we going to have the gig? And they kept going, take it easy, Michael. But he's trying to keep them focused. And I think the Hey Jude video very much is his statement as much as the Beatles statement. It's because it was his idea to bring all those people in. It was his idea to put the Beatles on top of each other like they used to be. There's something very, very connecting visually, orally with that and that song. Because that song is a stripped down song. In 1968, artists were going back to playing their instruments again. The psychedelic era had faded. The band up in Saugerties, I know George Harrison visited them, and Dylan puts out John Wesley Harding at the end of 67. Everybody's getting back to playing instruments again and stop with all the extra stuff going on. And the Beatles did too. And this is their statement for me. It's their statement. And one thing that was pointed out to me for a few of the people in the book, it's the last time all 4 Beatles go in to record a single, specifically for a single. I know that afterwards, the Ballad of John and Yoko is just Paul and John. And all the other singles from Abbey Road and Let It Be are on the album. But for 5 years prior, or 6 years prior, every Beatles single was a single. And then they had the albums. And they were a singles band. This is it. The last time they walk into a studio and do it. And then leave as the Beatles. And that's very important, I think.
Very cyclical, very much full circle.
Yes. Yes, it is. Agreed. Back to their roots. Yes. Musically, and also as a band. Correct.
But do you think its impact would have differed had it been planted among other songs on an album?
I do. I think it's a singular statement. I think it would have made a difference. And that's the way I feel about most great people. Look, Yesterday was released as a single in America, but not in England. Not in England. Yet there were, I think Strawberry Fields Forever, people make the argument, should it have been on Sgt. Pepper's? It sort of heralded that period I just talked about, which we were coming out of in 1968, which was the whole psychedelic, backwards tracks, Indian ragas, weird sounding vocals being run through Leslie speakers, entire orchestras playing at their own pace, avant-garde stuff, which, trust me, I love. But I think there is something about the Beatles single that is so Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out. Like I said, Strawberry Fields, Penny Lane, the A-B side. I mentioned Paperback Writer and Rain. There's something about that. The Beatles were a singles band. And I think it's very important that it's its own statement. And I think it's absolutely amazing to me. And again, someone else, please read the book so you can see. I can't remember everybody's quote and what they said, but someone pointed out, can you imagine the Beatles are doing Revolution Number 9, this 9-minute weirdo scape that, John and George and Yoko did. They're doing Helter Skelter. They're doing Cry Baby Cry. They're doing, My Guitar Gently Weeps. And then they go and turn around. They pivot in the middle of this giant opus, and they do Hey Jude, this beautiful ballad with a na-na sing-along at the end of it. It just shows their amazing alacrity to bounce all over the place and be very divergent. And this was a time, this is why it's important it's a single too. This was a time in which there were maybe 5 or 6 bands. Well, nobody was on the Beatles level. But you at least, you have the rivalry of the Beach Boys in America, the Rolling Stones from Richmond, and the Beatles. Maybe you, by 68, you throw in Hendrix, you throw the Who in there, the Kinks in England. In America, Janis Joplin is making her statement. Aretha Franklin and James Brown are making their statements. It's a very interesting time, but it's in nowadays, there's a democratization of music where you get way more people. But in the 90s, you had the great hip hop artists. Or the early 90s, you had the alternate artists. In the 80s, you had Prince, Madonna, and Michael Jackson, and then everybody else. For a while, Springsteen hung in there. For a while, Phil Collins hung there. But you had this thing. So when the Beatles make a statement like this, it's coming from that kind of thing where it's like, oh, hold on. Do you really get that anymore? Maybe Taylor Swift, maybe the Foo Fighters for a while. There are like, I'm not saying, and you know me, I write about new music and I do new music stuff with the Underwater Sunshine. I love new artists. But there's just so many of them. There were so few then. And we're only really 10 years removed from the birth of rock and roll. So no one knows where the hell this is going. And secondly, we're still in a period where journalists are asking questions like, how long do you think this is going to last? These are questions they were asking these people. Like, why do people like you? Was questions that they were being asked. You would never ask that of a popular artist today. Never. That's a ridiculous thing to ask. But nobody knew what they were dealing with. So when a single comes out like this, the impact is seismic, I think. And I think the people that I interviewed in the book, really echo that. Is that it's very hard to explain that to people of other generations. When the Beatles made a statement, it was a lasting one. And I think stuck in a double album like the White Album or the Beatles, it wouldn't have the same impact, I don't think. Yeah.
I completely agree, and I think Rob Sheffield definitely echoed that sentiment and calling that Hey Jude a statement more than it was a song, but it was also an act of colossal arrogance, quote, because of its length, and saying that we could release this and it will be played because it's us.
Right.
So with that being said, if Hey Jude was shorter, would it be what it is today? Would it be worth its weight in talking about?
Yeah, I think it was a quiche for then, and until American Pie, and I think it's great that I got Don McLean's daughter to comment in this book as well, but who's a great songwriter in her own role in Yellowthorn, Jackie McLean. That Don McLean's American Pie was a little longer, but when I was a kid, it came out, side A was 3.5 minutes and side B was like 3.5 minutes. This is all on side A, which goes to show you the amazing, George Martin and the people like Trident and Jeff Emmerich to make this sonically play well on a 45. Because as you know, the fatter the grooves, the better the sound. They were able to squeeze this amazing piece of music art onto one side. And then recently Taylor Swift ended up taking it with her 10-minute song right before I finished the song, so I got her into the manuscript. But I think that was more like a niche thing. Hey, look, we got the longest song. Because everybody was like, no, Beatles, not only do songs not... Listen, like Rolling Stone the year before was... A couple of years before, 65, was 6 minutes and change. And MacArthur Park came out that summer, but made it to number 2. So Hey Jude was the longest running number 1. But even when George Martin was like, there's no way they're going to play this on the radio, John was like, no, they'll do it because it's the Beatles. There's another example. I think it was more for that. Do I think that if there were 16 rounds of na-nas instead of 19, or if the song was 6 minutes and 30 seconds instead of 7? I think it's very important, though, that the second half of the song is longer than the first part. That is completely nuts. That's the radical statement that Rob is talking about. That's the arrogance of that. Is that we're not only going to put the song out, we're not only going to have this na-na thing happen, but we're going to make it go on for 4 minutes plus, and it's not going to be boring. Because every turnaround, something else happens. Some new instrument comes in. Some new rhythm is going to come in. So, yeah, I mean, I think for the time it was just a cute way of, let's have the longest single. But overall, I don't think it would have mattered if it was a couple of minutes shorter. I think the impact of the song is always going to be there for me. Yeah.
The refrain being so much longer, but also having the almost maniacal ad-libbing from Paul in there. I think really brings character to a song that kind of starts off solemnly.
Yes.
So I personally love the second half.
Me too.
And through reading this, it makes you remember how important the musicality of a song is outside of its lyrical component. And I think that the B-side as well with Revolution just makes perfect sense when it comes to sound and noise,
right,
in addition to what you're talking about message-wise.
Yeah, and the message is lost there. It just becomes this drone. It becomes this mantra. And also, that was another thing that surprised me too, you asked earlier, is when we get to how many people mentions the gospel underpinnings of this, the gospel chording of the double amen cadence, the double plagal cadence that Paul plays at the end over and over again, which is in a lot of gospel songs. And the fact that you have like Sam Cooke and the early gospel singers who would have these, what they would call vamps. And those vamps would go on for something like 8-9 minutes. They'd get lost. They'd feel the Spirit and they'd just scream and they would just, and that's what Paul's doing. It's a joyous scream. It's just his losing it in that song is just so inspiring to me. And it's the way Paul is talking through the music. He's using a music metaphor to take a sad song and make it better. And he's using the music to cleanse. The first part is like, you could do this as comfort. And the second part is the unity. Let's all get together and do this. Sing this song. And he's sort of like our little, our leader in a way, in a very real way. It's his song and he's the lead singer. But he comes back to remind you of this. And and it's great because he sings some of the lyrics too, take that sad song and make it better. Hey, Jude, come on. Like it's constantly building. It's so beautiful. And what George Martin did there by bringing first the strings, then the timpani, then the horn section. Like I said, each turnaround of the amen cadence never gets boring. It just keeps our attention. It keeps our attention. We're singing along, but musically, listen to it again. If nothing else, I would like people to just listen to the song again with new, fresh ears. Because quite a few of the songwriters that were younger, more your age, or a little older, would say, I don't remember a world without Hey Jude in it. So I kind of take it for granted. I hear it, no, that's great, okay, next. But they don't really listen. And that's true of a lot of songs. Take the time to listen to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Somebody to Watch Over Me, Respect, Both Sides Now, American Pie, Like a Rolling Stone. Listen to those songs again. Take a few minutes, a song you've heard 1 billion times and you think you know like the back of your hand. Take a moment because there's artistry behind that. And you hear new things. I am so happy that Marvin Gaye's What's Going On has gotten, seriously, just like Ram for Paul McCartney. That album, I think, was just the number one album in Rolling Stone's top 100 albums a couple of months ago. And that used to be like in the 60s. I wouldn't put it as my number one album, but that album was way underrated. Talk about a record that hit the zeitgeist, talked to his generation, talked to his race, talked to the people around him. What a beautiful statement that single was and that record is. And for people to recognize that, that's what I'm talking about. Listen to the songs that you listen to and you take for granted. You'll find new things in them. I know I did with this song and writing the book about it. So I'm so glad you said that about, hey, I look at the song in a different way now. That's mission accomplished for me. Yeah.
I do. I think
you.
the intricate layers of the song were uncovered in a different way because you hear it, but are you focusing on it? No. But now I am hearing it and focusing on it.
Oh, good. Good. And I hope that, again, I want to say this. I wanted this to be about songs. I didn't want it to be about just this song. I know it's a song. But I do want to say in the interviews, just to qualify, there are songs that people like better than Hey Jude, so listen to your song and see if you could pick out those things that you see in it.
I think Eric Hutchinson said something like that, and I wrote the quote down, which is, you never get to Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody without Hey Jude.
Yeah.
And, I also thought about how we may not have gotten to Hey Jude without A Day in the Life, or even, Band on the Run came later, but
yes.
You have these story songs, these narratives that come out of building off different stanzas and different pieces of emotion. There's no one way to write a song, and there's no one way to put music behind it. So I think melody plays very well in this. I think every single layer of Hey Jude tells its own story and also paves the way for everyone else's stories. So that is like the biggest thing I took away from this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think Professor Frank Samarato said that he wrote this paper that I quote in the book, The Expectancy and the Infinity. The expectancy is the ballad part. We know Paul's sung the ballad parts. And then the infinity section where it breaks off in its own thing. So it's in and of itself its own thing. Just like what's happening in Paul's generation, where you have this strong movement, let's say everybody's behind the civil rights movement, and then these fractured movements, the students' movements, the women's movement, the free speech movement, and then you have the infinity section where everybody gets together to sing, and then it goes off into it could be played forever, and it's two parts of a whole, but yet two separate things. Not to get too haughty, but these are things that are brought up in the book, and then of course the idea that other songs are like this in the future. I know Eric brought up a Bohemian Rhapsody, but think about a song like Layla, with that piano part at the end. It has nothing to do with the first part, but you couldn't imagine the song without it. So yeah, I think that that's very well said. Yeah.
Professor William Boone, he wrote that the Beatles made middle-class white kids feel like they could have their own band, which I know is something that Billy Joel has expressed many times.
Sure, yeah.
Saying that he saw John and was like, he is the antithesis of a Frankie Valli or even a Sinatra, and I saw myself in him, and now we have Billy Joel doing his Madison Square Garden residency for some 80 shows. So I was reading the book and I was thinking a lot about songs that were also lengthy storyteller songs, but that also had an effect. And of course you have to think of like A Piano Man, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant from Billy Joel. And I'm wondering for you, having done all this research on Hey Jude and the band, were there any songs that now you want to explore similarly, or at least you look at in the same way now you can look at Hey Jude?
No. I'm sick of this. No, I mean, I do that anyway as a personal fun thing. I did that podcast with Adam Duritz for a few years, the Underwater Sunshine Show. We hope to get back to it at some point, but that's what we did. We took songs and we tried to get people to understand why we love them and why they might love them, or what makes them unique and that kind of thing. Yeah, I never even considered doing... I guess this song just mattered to me because it's the earliest memories I have of singing as a kid. That wasn't, something from the Bozo Show, or, I predate Sesame Street. So I do remember singing the Na-Nas to get me to sleep, but I guess 5 or 6, whenever that song was popular. I don't even know where I would have heard it, but it was something that meant something to me. And then right before, when I had the idea in spring of 19, my father got sick and passed in the fall of 2019. And the last song I heard before he died was Hey Jude. So there was a couple of those touch points for me. And then, when I wrote it, the pandemic hit. I wasn't going to do it. I thought, this is nuts. I'm not writing I'm writing a book about one song. The publisher liked the idea, but they weren't like knocking down my door. And then the pandemic hit. And I decided, and everybody was talking about 1968. And it's like the universe was saying, do this. And I started to work on it. And thank goodness I wanted to get this out, that John Cirillo from Backbeat Books was such a support for me when nobody else, because none of us, we all know, we did nothing. We didn't see our friends. We didn't go anywhere. We didn't see bands. So I was working all the time, and that could get a bit much. I've always dreamed of just doing nothing but writing. And I think if I did, I probably would go mad, because this was those periods, and I love seeing my wife and daughter every day. But after a while, you do need interaction, And so John was like this voice out in the wilderness that I would email, and he would get right back to me. And I'd say, hey, I found this out, and this is really going well. He's like, oh, he'd always remind me, we haven't bought the book yet, so don't get crazy. But he was very supportive. So I don't think I would do this again. No, I mean, I do... But I will say this, though. I think having interviewed all these professors of different disciplines, all these songwriters from different generations, and all these amazing other journalists and authors who I got to know writing this book, I think I could look at other songs that way. I hope I give you the tools in this book to be able to go to your favorite song, I'm going to say it again, and use the same tools to find out whether it works for your song. No matter what kind of genre, what era. And one of the inspirations I had was I wrote a piece for what was then Dog Door Cultural, which is now the Pittsburgher, my friends out there, on Somewhere Over the Rainbow a couple of years ago. And that's my favorite song of all time. And I tried to figure out why I think it's my favorite song of all time. And I'm not sure I got to the bottom of it because I didn't spend a year of my life and interview all these very smart people about it. But I think I was on the right path. And this was like the culmination of that. Yeah. So I think I've said my piece on songs now, I think.
So there's no other songs you want to delve into like this?
No. You? Would you write a book about a song?
I would write a book about a song.
And it would be?
I would write a book about probably Lady Madonna, actually, another Beatles song.
Oh.
Because I've always just loved the story and the fact that each day of the week is mentioned except for Saturday, and I would want to figure out why Saturday wasn't mentioned. What happens on that Saturday?
I have no idea. That's a good point.
In the midst of writing this book, Paul McCartney released the lyrics. Did you reference or look into his lyrical process going into this, or have you read it? Will you be reading it?
I have not. I think I know most of the... And again, I know that Paul's not really known as a lyricist, but I do love his stuff. Like I said, I think Ram is one of the best albums of the 70s. I think it's my second favorite Beatle solo album. And I was joking with people recently, when I liked that album in the 80s and everybody was crapping on it, I'm like, what am I missing? This album is brilliant. And now everyone's come to Jesus on it, so I'm glad. I'm sorry. You asked if what?
So in the middle of writing this, Paul McCartney releases his own book.
Yes, the lyrics. Right. I have not. I think, again, because I'm a writer, I tend to be more literate when I break things down. And what I tried to do, specifically in the Zevon book, and I did here, was to try to give homage to the music, the band, the arrangement, and the melody. Because as Adam George points out, melody comes from nowhere. Lyrics come from experience, English language. We all write, we all read, but not everybody can come up with a tune like Hey Jude or any of the other tunes that Paul has come up with. And it's a special talent that he has. By researching this book, I was very much moved, again, by Paul's empathy about his respect and his constant commentary on women in a period where, and listen, Paul was just as misogynistic as every other rock star at the time, but in his art, whether it be Lady Madonna or Your Mother Should Know or And I Love Her, or, all these very empowered women, referencing his mother in Let It Be, referencing, I believe, his mother in Hey Jude in a way. I find that that's very unique among any period rock stars or rock or pop artists. Had an incredible ability to see past gender, or at least put himself in the shoes, like in Lady Madonna, of the single mother. Nobody's writing songs about this at that time, or really any time, men. It's very mature, but it's also very empathetic. And I put a lot of that on his mom. And I think a lot of his lyrics, that's where I'm saying that you'll find in Paul's lyrics, not even just the beautiful melodies, there's something about feeling someone else's pain and expressing it, putting himself there, like Eleanor Rigby. I mean, come on. I mean, who's writing songs like that then? We take it for granted this single ability to see how the other half lives. And I think Paul does that as well as anyone. And that's the emotional currency of Hey Jude. It's Paul's ability to express that. And we all feel it, because we all sang that song at the end. And whether we care or not about what he sang for the first 3.5 minutes, we certainly care at the end.